The emergency alarms screamed through the massive halls of the Galactic Council building. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, casting scary shadows on the walls. Ambassador Velen stood in front of a huge glowing screen, his whole body shaking with fear. The news was terrible. During the night, 3 more star systems had been completely destroyed. The Void Swarm had eaten them up like a hungry monster, turning 12 billion living beings into nothing but space dust. Velen wiped sweat from his forehead with one of his 4 arms. He had been the Council's military advisor for over 200 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The Void Swarm wasn't just another enemy they could fight with regular weapons. It was something much worse. Council leader Thura walked slowly to the center of the room. Her crystal-like skin was usually bright and colorful, but today it looked dull and gray. When she spoke, her voice cracked like breaking glass. Friends, we have tried everything we can think of. Our best scientists, our strongest weapons, our smartest battle plans. Nothing works. The swarm learns from every attack we make and becomes stronger. The other council members sat quietly in their floating chairs. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others looked like walking trees or giant insects. But they all had the same expression of hopelessness on their faces. For thousands of years, their civilizations had lived in peace. They had never needed to fight real wars because everyone in the galaxy got along well. Velen's 6 eyes suddenly focused on something in the corner of his computer screen. It was an old file that had been locked away for centuries. The file was covered in warning symbols that meant, danger, do not open. His hands trembled as he clicked on it. Wait, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There might be one more option. But it's very dangerous. All the council members turned to look at him. Thura floated closer. What do you mean, Velen? In the Forbidden Archives, there are records of a species called humans. They come from what we call a Deathworld, a planet so violent and dangerous that only the strongest creatures can survive there. The planet is covered in disasters like earthquakes, storms, and deadly animals. Most species would die there in minutes. The room became completely silent. Everyone knew the ancient laws. The Galactic Council had made contact with Deathworld species illegal over 1,000 years ago. They believed such creatures would be too violent and savage to live peacefully with civilized races. These humans, Velen continued, reading from the old files, they somehow survived on this nightmare planet. The records say they not only survived but became the most dangerous species on their world. They learned to hunt, to fight, to never give up even when facing impossible odds. Thura's crystal skin turned even paler. You're suggesting we contact these monsters? I'm suggesting we contact warriors, Velen replied firmly. Look at our situation. We are peaceful people. We have never learned how to really fight because we never needed to. But the swarm? The swarm knows only destruction. Maybe we need someone who understands destruction too. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some council members were horrified at the idea. They imagined savage beasts who would kill first and ask questions later. Others pointed out that they were already facing extinction. What did they have to lose? Finally, as the reports came in of 2 more systems being consumed by the swarm, Thura made the decision that would change everything. Send the signal, she whispered, her voice heavy with fear and hope. Contact these humans. May the stars forgive us for what we're about to unleash upon the galaxy. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy on a massive space station orbiting Earth, Admiral Jake Morrison was having his morning coffee and reading daily reports. Jake was 55 years old, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes from years of military service. He had fought in 3 different wars and had seen both the best and worst of humanity. His peaceful morning was interrupted when Lieutenant Amy Parker burst into his office. Amy was young, maybe 28, with short blonde hair and bright green eyes that always seemed to be looking for the next challenge. Sir, you need to see this right now, she said, almost out of breath from running. We're picking up some kind of transmission from outside our galaxy. It's not like anything we've ever received before. Jake followed Amy to the communications center, where dozens of technicians were working frantically at their computers. On the main screen was a series of strange symbols and patterns that seemed to pulse with their own light. The computer is trying to translate it now, Amy explained. But sir, the energy readings from where this signal came from are incredible. Something out there is destroying entire star systems. Jake's expression grew serious as he watched the translation appear on the screen word by word. It was a desperate plea for help from something called the Galactic Council. They were facing total extinction from an enemy they couldn't defeat. And somehow, they had learned about Earth and its people. The message was simple but powerful: to the warriors of the Deathworld Earth, we are dying. Please help us. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what this meant. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer, and their first impression on the galaxy might be as its saviors. He turned to Amy with determination in his eyes. Get me fleet command. It looks like someone out there needs our help, and we're not going to let them down. The greatest adventure in human history was about to begin. The space around the alien refuge planet suddenly rippled like water as 3 enormous human ships appeared out of nowhere. The aliens who had been hiding in this distant star system looked up at their screens in terror and amazement. They had never seen ships like these before. The biggest ship, called the USS Defiance, was absolutely massive. It was 3 times larger than the biggest alien cruiser and looked like it was built for war. Its dark metal hull was covered in weapon ports and armor plating. Behind it came 2 smaller but equally impressive ships, one painted white with red crosses on its sides, and another covered in strange scanning equipment and satellite dishes. Down on the refugee station, millions of aliens from dozens of different species pressed against the windows to get a look at these mysterious newcomers. Some looked like giant insects with multiple arms and legs. Others resembled walking plants with leaves instead of hair. There were creatures that looked like floating jellyfish and others that seemed to be made of living rock. But they all had one thing in common: they were all terrified of what these Deathworld beings might do to them. Ambassador Velen tried to control his shaking as he walked toward the docking bay. His 6 eyes kept darting around nervously, and his 4 arms kept twitching. He had read the old files about humans, but seeing their ships in person made everything feel much more real and frightening. When the shuttle door opened and Admiral Jake Morrison stepped out, Velen was shocked. He had expected some kind of monster, maybe a creature with razor-sharp claws, thick armor, or weapons growing out of its body. Instead, he saw what looked like a fairly ordinary being. The human was actually smaller than Velen himself, with no visible weapons and soft-looking skin instead of protective scales or shells. But there was something about the way the human carried himself that made every alarm bell in Velen's head start ringing. Morrison moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced danger many times before. His eyes were calm but alert, constantly taking in everything around him. When he looked directly at Velen, the ambassador felt like he was being studied by a predator deciding whether he was a threat or not. "We got your message asking for help," Morrison said in a steady voice. "Show us what we're up against." Over the next few hours, Velen watched in amazement as the humans went to work. It was like watching a perfectly organized machine made of living beings. Captain Lisa Turner, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, immediately took her medical ship to the areas where wounded aliens were hiding. Her crew began setting up emergency hospitals and treating injuries that alien doctors had given up on. Meanwhile, Commander Mike Davis and his science team started collecting pieces of destroyed swarm ships to study them. They worked with an intensity that impressed even the most dedicated alien researchers. Every fragment was carefully examined, every piece of data was recorded and analyzed. What surprised the aliens most was how calm the humans remained. When they talked about battle plans and weapons systems, their voices never got excited or scared. They discussed strategies for fighting the deadly swarm the same way they might talk about what to have for lunch. How can they stay so relaxed? Velen whispered to Council Leader Thura as they watched the humans work. They're talking about facing the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy, but they seem completely unworried. Dr. Rebecca Collins, the human scientist who was studying alien biology, happened to overhear them. She was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and glasses that made her look very intelligent. She looked up from the alien tissue samples she was examining and smiled at them. "It's not that we're not worried," she explained patiently. "We're always worried when lives are at stake. But we learned a long time ago that panicking doesn't help anyone. When you panic, you make mistakes. When you make mistakes in dangerous situations, people die. So we trained ourselves to stay calm and think clearly, no matter how scary things get." Thura's crystal-like skin flickered with confused colors. "But how can you learn such a thing? Fear is natural. It keeps us alive." "Fear is natural for us too," Dr. Collins replied. "But on our world, we learned that there are two kinds of fear. There's the kind that makes you run away and hide, and there's the kind that makes you more careful and focused. We try to use the second kind." Just as she finished speaking, the alarm systems throughout the station began screaming. On every screen, red warning symbols flashed as the sensors picked up new contacts approaching the system. The Void Swarm had found them. The alien refugees immediately began running toward the escaped ships, just as they had done dozens of times before. But to their surprise, the humans didn't move. They just stood at their posts, calmly checking their weapons and equipment. Admiral Morrison's voice came over the communication system, reaching every ship in the fleet. His tone was as steady as if he was giving routine orders during a training exercise. "All ships, prepare for combat operations. Weapons systems online. It's time to show these machines what happens when you mess with a species that grew up fighting for survival every single day." The alien refugees stopped running and turned to stare. For the first time since the Void Swarm had begun its terrible rampage across the galaxy, someone wasn't running away. Someone was actually planning to fight back. As the first black shapes of swarm ships began appearing at the edge of the star system, the humans powered up their weapons and moved into attack formation. The aliens watched in wonder and terror, not knowing whether they were about to witness the galaxy's salvation or its final destruction. But one thing was certain: the Void Swarm was about to learn why Earth was called a death world, and why the species that survived there were the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. The alien leaders crowded together in the human command center, their eyes wide with shock and horror as they listened to the humans plan their next move. What they were hearing sounded completely insane to their peaceful minds. Colonel Tom Hayes stood in front of a huge three-dimensional map that showed the entire star system. He was a tall man with graying hair and scars on his hands from years of military service. As he moved his fingers through the hologram, the image changed to show the nearby moon and the approaching swarm ships. "Here's what we're going to do," Tom said in a matter-of-fact voice, as if he was explaining how to make breakfast. "We'll use the moon's gravity to launch chunks of rock and metal at incredible speeds. When they hit the swarm ships, the impact will punch holes right through their armor." Council Leader Thura's crystal skin turned completely white with shock. "You want to destroy an entire moon?" she gasped, her voice high with panic. Lieutenant Amy Parker, a young woman with bright eyes and a cheerful smile, laughed as if Thura had made a funny joke. "Oh no, we're not going to destroy it completely. We're just going to break it apart and use the pieces as weapons. Think of it like the biggest shotgun blast in history." Ambassador Velen felt his 4 hearts beating so fast he thought they might explode. "This is complete madness," he shouted, his 6 eyes bulging with disbelief. "You talk about destroying moons and using planets as weapons like you're discussing the weather. What kind of monsters are you?" Dr. Rebecca Collins looked up from her computer screen where streams of data were flowing past in patterns the aliens couldn't understand. She was a quiet woman who usually spoke softly, but her words carried a weight that made everyone listen carefully. "We've been studying how the Void Swarm thinks and fights," she explained calmly. "They're incredibly smart, but they're also completely logical. Every decision they make is based on mathematics and predictable patterns. They adapt to new threats by analyzing them and finding the most efficient counter-strategy. She pointed to her screen where complex graphs and charts showed the swarm's behavior patterns. But here's the thing, humans don't work that way. We don't always make the logical choice. Sometimes we do things that don't make sense, that seem stupid or crazy. And that's actually our greatest strength. Admiral Morrison nodded seriously, his weathered face showing the wisdom of someone who had survived many impossible battles. Every species the swarm has destroyed so far has been predictable. They follow rules. They make logical decisions. They do what makes sense according to their nature and culture. He gestured toward the tactical display where red dots representing swarm ships were getting closer and closer to their position. But humans learn to survive on a world where the logical choice would get you killed. We learn to be unpredictable, to take crazy risks, to do things that shouldn't work but somehow do. Tom Hayes pulled up another display showing Earth's history. Images flashed by of humans climbing impossible mountains, sailing across dangerous oceans, and exploring frozen wastelands. For thousands of years, we've been doing things that other species would consider suicide missions. We've learned that sometimes the craziest plan is the one that works. Suddenly, Captain Lisa Turner's voice came over the communication system from the medical bay. Lisa was usually busy taking care of wounded people, but her medical sensors had picked up something important about the swarm itself. Admiral, I've been analyzing the biological components we found in the swarm wreckage. Their processing systems are designed to handle pure logic and mathematical thinking. But when I tested them with recordings of human emotional responses, their circuits couldn't handle it. They literally overloaded trying to process feelings like fear, anger, love, and hope. The aliens in the command center looked at each other with confusion. They had emotions too, but they had never thought of feelings as a weapon. Morrison's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam. So you're telling me that these machines can adapt to any logical strategy, but they can't handle emotional and irrational behavior? Exactly, Lisa replied. Their systems are so focused on efficiency and logic that they have no way to process chaotic, emotional decision-making. A slow smile spread across Morrison's face, the kind of smile that made even his own crew members a little nervous. Then let's give them something they'll never be able to understand or adapt to. He turned to Tom Hayes. Colonel, prepare the Beethoven Protocol. The alien representatives looked at each other with complete bewilderment. The what protocol? Velen asked weakly. Tom grinned as he began typing commands into his console. Music, Ambassador. We're going to attack them with music. Music? Thara repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. You're going to fight the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy with songs. Amy Parker was practically bouncing with excitement as she helped upload files to the weapons systems. Not just music. We're loading everything, symphonies, rock songs, children's lullabies, opera, jazz, even some really terrible pop music from the 2020s. But also poetry, Dr. Collins added, her fingers flying over her keyboard. And recordings of people laughing, crying, telling jokes, arguing with each other. Basically, we're going to hit them with the most chaotic, emotional, completely irrational collection of human thoughts and feelings we can put together. The aliens watched in stunned silence as the humans worked with incredible speed and efficiency to turn their emotions into weapons. They were uploading recordings of birthday parties and funeral services, love songs and angry rap music, comedy shows and dramatic speeches. This is impossible, Velen whispered to himself. They're going to fight a war using feelings and songs. Either they're the greatest geniuses in the galaxy, or they're completely insane. Morrison overheard him and chuckled grimly. Maybe we're both, Ambassador. That's what makes us human. As the final files uploaded and the swarm ships moved into attack position, the humans prepared to teach the galaxy's greatest threat why chaos could be more powerful than logic, and why the heart could triumph over the machine. The edge of space itself seemed to tear open as the final void swarm fleet arrived. It wasn't like watching normal ships come out of hyperspace, it was like watching nightmares become real. Thousands upon thousands of black mechanical ships poured through the opening, each one the size of a city and covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. The alien refugees pressed against every window and viewing screen they could find, watching in terror as their worst fears came true. The swarm fleet stretched across the entire star system like a plague of mechanical locusts. There were so many ships that they blocked out the light from distant stars. 10,000 vessels of pure destruction, all focused on one goal, harvesting every living thing in the system. Ambassador Velen collapsed into his chair, his 6 eyes wide with despair. "It's over," he whispered. "There are too many of them. Even these crazy humans can't fight that many ships." But Admiral Morrison stood calmly at his command post, watching the enemy fleet arrange itself for attack. His face was serious but not afraid. He had seen impossible odds before, and he knew that sometimes the most desperate situations called for the most desperate solutions. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," his voice rang out across every human vessel in the fleet. "Begin the Beethoven Protocol transmission. Show them what it means to be human." What happened next was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. From every human ship, speakers came to life with the most beautiful and chaotic sounds imaginable. Classical music from the great composer Bach filled the void of space, mixing with the giggles and laughter of human children playing in Earth's parks. Famous poets reading their most emotional works blended together with rock and roll music that made hearts race with excitement. Opera singers hit notes so pure they could bring tears to your eyes, while comedians told jokes that made people laugh until their sides hurt. Love songs about finding your soulmate played alongside angry protest songs about fighting injustice. The human ships weren't just broadcasting this emotional symphony, they were beaming it directly at the swarm fleet like a weapon made of pure feeling and chaos. The effect was immediate and stunning. The perfectly organized swarm formation began to wobble and shake. Ships that had been moving in perfect mathematical patterns suddenly started flying in confused circles. The mechanical fleet's processing computers, designed to handle logical data and predictable patterns, were completely overwhelmed by the chaotic beauty of human emotion. "It's actually working." Dr. Rebecca Collins shouted from her monitoring station, her voice filled with amazement and excitement. "Their computer systems are trying to analyze and adapt to our transmission, but they can't process the emotional content. Their logic circuits are overloading." On the main screen, the alien leaders could see the swarm ships beginning to malfunction. Warning lights flashed across their hulls as their computer systems tried desperately to understand why humans would broadcast lullabies and birthday songs in the middle of a battle. Commander Mike Davis knew this was their chance. "All fighter squadrons, follow my lead," he called out as he launched his small ship directly toward the heart of the massive enemy fleet. His squadron of human pilots followed him, their ships looking tiny compared to the enormous swarm vessels surrounding them. But as they flew, something incredible happened. The human pilots weren't just flying their ships, they were living and feeling every moment of the battle. They laughed with joy at pulling off impossible maneuvers. They cried with sadness when they saw destroyed refugee ships. They sang along with the music being broadcast, their voices adding to the emotional chaos that was confusing the enemy. Captain Steve Johnson, a pilot known for his calm professionalism, found himself doing things that made no logical sense. He flew his fighter ship through gaps so narrow that his wings almost touched the enemy hulls. He spun and danced through enemy fire while broadcasting a comedy show about talking animals. "This is completely insane," he radioed to his fellow pilots, his voice filled with both terror and incredible excitement. "I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life, but somehow I've never felt more alive. These machines have no idea how to handle this." The alien spectators watched in complete amazement as the human pilots continued their impossible attack. The pilots were displaying every human emotion at once, fear and courage, sadness and joy, anger and love. Their flight patterns were so unpredictable and chaotic that the swarm's targeting computers couldn't lock onto them. At the center of the enemy fleet, the main swarm command ship began to pulse with erratic lights. Its massive computer brain, designed to process logical military data, was being bombarded with recordings of humans laughing at funny movies, crying at sad stories, and singing songs about hope and friendship. The mechanical mind that had conquered 1,000 worlds couldn't understand why these strange creatures would risk their lives while broadcasting children's nursery rhymes and love letters. Every time it tried to adapt and counter their strategy, the humans would do something even more irrational and unpredictable. But victory was not coming without a terrible cost. As the battle continued, human ships began to fall. Brave pilots sacrificed their lives to keep the emotional bombardment going, flying their damaged vessels directly into enemy ships while broadcasting wedding songs and birthday wishes. Each loss was felt by every human in the fleet, and their grief and determination only added to the chaotic emotional signal that was slowly destroying the swarm's ability to think clearly. Lieutenant Amy Parker, tears streaming down her face as she watched friends die around her, continued to upload more human emotional content to the broadcast system. "For everyone we've lost," she whispered, "and for everyone we're trying to save." The final assault on the galaxy's greatest enemy had become something no one had ever imagined, a battle fought with the full spectrum of human feelings, proving that sometimes the heart could be more powerful than any weapon ever built. The end came suddenly and completely. Across the vast emptiness of space, a sound unlike anything anyone had ever heard before echoed through subspace communications, the death scream of the void swarm. It wasn't really a scream that you could hear with your ears, but every living being with technology advanced enough to detect subspace signals felt it in their bones. The massive swarm network, which had terrorized the galaxy for years and destroyed countless civilizations, simply collapsed. One moment it was a terrifying force of mechanical destruction, and the next it was just thousands of dead ships drifting silently through space. The computer minds that had been so perfectly logical and efficient couldn't handle the beautiful chaos of human emotions and thoughts. They had literally thought themselves to death trying to understand why humans would sing lullabies while fighting wars. In the sudden silence that followed, rescue ships from both the human fleet and the surviving alien vessels began the sad but necessary work of searching for survivors and recovering the dead. The space around the refugee world was filled with debris from destroyed ships, both human and swarm, creating a graveyard that stretched across millions of miles. Ambassador Velen found Admiral Morrison 3 days after the battle, standing quietly in front of a long black wall that had been set up on the main human ship. The wall was covered with names, thousands and thousands of names written in both human letters and alien symbols. These were the names of everyone who had died in the fight against the swarm, both human and alien, all remembered together as heroes who had sacrificed everything to save the galaxy. Morrison stood there without moving, his weathered face showing the weight of command and the pain of losing so many good people. His uniform was clean and pressed, but his eyes told the story of a man who had sent friends to their deaths and would carry that burden for the rest of his life. "Admiral," Velen said softly, not wanting to disturb the human's moment of remembrance. "The Galactic Council has met and made a decision. We want to offer humanity full membership in the Council. You would have all the rights and protections that come with being a recognized galactic civilization. Your species has more than earned a place among the stars." Morrison continued to look at the memorial wall for a long moment before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "We appreciate the offer, Ambassador. We really do. But right now, we've got more important work to do. There are dozens of worlds out there that the swarm damaged or destroyed. Billions of people who need help rebuilding their homes and their lives. We can't sit in council chambers talking about politics when there are people who need our help." And it was true. Even as they spoke, human engineering teams were already loading their ships with construction equipment and heading out to the damaged star systems. Dr. Rebecca Collins had set up research stations throughout the galaxy where she was teaching other species how to develop what she called chaos protocols, ways of thinking and acting that were unpredictable enough to confuse any future mechanical threats. Captain Lisa Turner and her medical teams were working around the clock, treating injured aliens with the same care and dedication they had shown to wounded humans. They had set up field hospitals on refugee worlds and were teaching alien doctors new techniques for treating trauma and injuries. Council leader Thura arrived at the memorial wall and stood beside Morrison and Velen. Her crystal-like skin was still pale from the stress of recent events, but there was something new in her expression, a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "with your technology and your military skills, you could have easily conquered our entire civilization. We would have been completely helpless against you. Our weapons are designed for defense, not conquest. Our people have never learned to fight real wars. You could have made yourselves the rulers of the galaxy." Morrison finally turned away from the memorial wall to look at her. Despite everything he had been through, despite all the death and destruction he had witnessed, his eyes were gentle and kind. But there was also something unbreakable in them, the strength that came from knowing what you stood for and being willing to fight for it. "Conquest was never the point," he said simply. "You called for help. When someone asks for help, you help them. That's what being human means." 6 months later, something unprecedented happened in the galaxy. The first integrated human-alien military academy opened its doors on a peaceful world near the center of Council space. The building was beautiful, with architecture that combined human engineering with alien artistic traditions. Above the main entrance, carved in stone and written in over a dozen different alien languages, were words that would become famous throughout the galaxy: "True strength is not avoiding the storm, but learning to dance in the rain." The academy was unlike any military school that had ever existed. Human instructors worked alongside alien teachers to create a new kind of warrior, one who understood that violence without purpose was just savage brutality, but violence guided by compassion and love could save entire worlds. Students from hundreds of different species learned to embrace what humans called controlled chaos, the ability to be unpredictable and creative in dangerous situations while never losing sight of what they were fighting to protect. They learned that true strength came not from being the biggest or the strongest, but from being willing to sacrifice for others. The alien cadets were amazed to discover that human military training focused as much on protecting civilians and helping refugees as it did on fighting enemies. They learned that the most dangerous warriors were not those who loved war, but those who hated it so much they were willing to fight to end it. The galaxy had sent out a desperate call for help, expecting to receive savage monsters from a death world. Instead, they had received something far more powerful and far more dangerous: humans who had learned to combine their incredible capacity for destruction with an infinite capacity for love and compassion. In the years that followed, when new threats emerged and when disasters struck peaceful worlds, the cry would go out across the galaxy: "Send for the humans." Not because humans were the strongest or the most advanced, but because when the universe was at its darkest, humans had proven they would always choose to be the light. And that, in the end, made all the difference in a galaxy that had finally learned what it meant to have heroes.